Well, good evening. It's time for our Bible study. And if you have been watching this Bible study before, you know that I'm in a different set tonight. I'm in my woodworking shop, and I'm not just out here to cut dovetails or bore you with woodworking stuff. Although I did do a men's Bible study, a men's breakfast back at the beginning of the pandemic here in the study, where I did a video lesson on how to cut dovetails. And I did a takeaway Tuesday when Nathan was away on vacation, and did that devotion here in the woodworking shop. But I'm out here for a very different reason tonight. The air conditioning is off in our house. I mean, totally off. And I set up to do my study in there this evening, and I thought, man, my woodworking shop is on a different air conditioning unit. It's got its own little heat pump. And so I came in and cranked the air down, and it's nice and comfortable in here. You can probably hear a little bit of an echo because it's got hardwood floors and hard walls, and the sound kind of bounces a little bit, but hopefully that won't be too bad. Right now I've got a good Wi-Fi signal, but if I drop off, if suddenly the Wi-Fi pops out and the video stops, somebody tell me, and I'll run inside and crank up the study back inside the house, where I know the Wi-Fi signal is good and strong, and the heat is warm. We'll be just fine. We've got an air conditioning company ordering us a compressor and getting it put in soon, so we'll have it back up and running. Couple of things to announce. One is we've been doing something this school year that we've done the last 2 or 3 years. Christ Church, you do this. We buy lunch for teachers on the days whenever they need to be at school, getting ready for children to show up. Oftentimes they have a work day, and so we pick a day, we let the school pick one, and we buy lunch for the teachers, or sometimes they'll select a late breakfast. Today, Lindsay Gallagher and I were out at Wolf Teaver Elementary, and they were so appreciative, thanking you, Christ Church, for providing their lunch. We have some dry erase pens and markers and things, and we give them cards they fill out, and we distribute those cards to people to pray for the teacher all through the year. But it gave us an opportunity, too, to invite them to come to our church for blessing of the teachers coming up on the 29th, and also Fun Day Sunday coming up on the 22nd. We visited East Brainerd Elementary earlier. We did Westview, and we also did Appleton Elementary. So we've hit those 4 and enjoy doing that. Let's see, I got our Fun Day Sunday mailer today. It's interesting. I had really hoped that those mailers would go out early next week, but the company jumped the gun and did them a little early, which is not a bad thing. I hope you got your mailer today. If not, you'll probably get it tomorrow or the next day if you live within easy driving distance of Christ Church. And it's good to get those. Let's talk just a little bit about our plans to finish the Gospel of John and what we'll do next. Lawrence Clark, bless his heart, one of our former pastors, was at church Sunday and was telling me he's really enjoying this study of, Greg said he got his mailer today. Our son John lives in Quail Run, and they got theirs today, he tells me. But Lawrence said, David, I'm enjoying your Bible study on John, but I wish you'd have taken just a little bit more time with chapter 16. It occurred to me the other day that I need to slow down just a little on these final chapters. Thank you, Lawrence, for that comment. Tonight we're going to do chapter 18, and we'll just barely touch 19. Who knows how far we'll get into it, but I'm feeling no sense of urgency. This is good scripture. And then we'll do chapter 19 next week, and then chapter 20 probably by itself, and 21. And that takes us right up to September 8th, Wednesday night, September 8th. We'll finish chapter 21 on September 1st. And here's my plan for September 8th. That's when we start back with Wednesday night meals. You've heard us, you saw a video probably if you were at worship on Sunday. We're calling it Community Cafe. It's free this year. And We're offering homework help to all the children who come and want to receive homework help, which means we need you guys to come and volunteer to help those little guys with their homework. But I'm going to do a hybrid class, and I'll do it at 7 o'clock, just like I'm doing this one. Instead of being in my study at home or here in my workshop, I'll probably be in room M5 at the church. And if you want to come to the meal and hang around for the study, come to M5. But I'll set my phone up like I do for this study, and we'll make it a hybrid. It'll be online and in person. So looking forward to that. And here's what I want to do. I've bounced this off a few people, and so far people have been really enthusiastic about it. I teach a class sometimes, and it's been a long, 3 years or something since I taught this. It's called, What Does It Mean to Be a Christian? And in that, I look at different Christian theology and doctrine, and I lift up those things that Catholics and Baptists and Methodists and Lutheran and Presbyterian and Church of Christ and so many Christian denominations agree on. We'll look at topics like salvation and the sacraments, and we'll talk about little differences. You know, here's something the Baptists emphasize when we talk about sacraments. We'll talk about how some churches believe only in immersion and how the Methodist Church uses 3 methods. We'll talk about a few of the differences, but what I'll really emphasize will be those things that we share together. There's a whole lot more that connects us as Christians than that divides us, and unfortunately, we tend to emphasize the things that are different that divides us. So we'll do, 4 or 5 lessons on what does it mean to be a Christian, looking at that common Christian theology. And then we'll shift gears and say, what does it mean to be Methodist? And when we do that one, we'll go back through some of the same things, but we'll also look at practices. And we'll talk about, so what's unique about the Methodist? What do we believe? And when I do that in person at Christ Church, it's usually pretty popular. A lot of people say, I've been Methodist for quite a while, but I don't really understand some of the things that we do and some of the things that we believe. I don't understand some of the things about being connected. So we'll do that. And for those of you who are enjoying the study who aren't Methodist, just let me say this right up front. I never, ever, ever put down a church for what they believe in. Churches don't make it up. Churches have reasons for their theology and their practices. So I hope you'll join us for that. Let me know if this sounds like a good study. And come September 8th, when we crank up our Wednesday Community Cafe, we'll be ready to shift gears into this study. And then after that, if they're still interested in continuing an online study, and you'll have to tell me then if there is interest, then we'll pick another book of the Bible and study it. I love doing Bible study. So let's get into our study for the night. Last week we did 16 and 17. That's when Brother Lawrence said, David, you may have gone just a little fast on 16. There is something about final instructions that, and thank you for those of you who are making comments about my plan here. There's something about final instructions that make us really listen. And it makes us also look back. Sometimes we don't realize final instructions are final until after the fact. Jesus in chapters 16 and 17 is talking to his disciples on the last night before his arrest. And they would look back on this. He was telling them, where I'm going, you can't go. He's saying things that let them know that I'm going away. And so that made them sit up and listen. But also when they look back after his crucifixion, they're going to say, what was it he said that night? So these chapters, they should be studied carefully and slowly because they are final instructions. Jesus will give us some more instructions after he is risen from the dead and before he ascends into heaven. But all of that comes here at the end of John. Jesus in these 2 chapters prayed for his apostles, prayed for all those disciples that God had given him, but he also prayed for people like us who would come later, who didn't get to be with him personally, but who learned because of the teachings of the apostles. And Jesus prays for us in that. He prays that we'll be united. He says, just like the Father and I are one, I pray that they and you, Father, will be one and that we'll be united together. It's one of the reasons I like to do Bible or studies like that when I mentioned earlier on what does it mean to be a Christian, where I emphasize how the Christian beliefs transcend denomination. I don't think Jesus would mind that we have denominations, but I think he would mind when we are divided and we criticize one another, or we make fun of one another, or we say that we're right and other denominations are wrong. Jesus would absolutely not like that. He says, the world will know that you're mine when they see that you are one together. And in another place when he says that they see that we love each other. All right, we're going to get into chapter 18 now, and I'm going to read. Becky's doing choir practice again tonight, but I'll do verses 1 through 3, chapter 8. Follow along with me if you'd like, and your translation may be different than mine. If you see something in that piques your interest, speak up and let me know. I'm reading from the NIV tonight. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Okay, I've mentioned a number of times as we went through this Gospel of John that John presents things differently than the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They will tell things in a different way than John. Some of what John described as happening in the upper room here at this Last Supper, the other Gospel writers tell about it happening in the garden. Jesus' prayer, for example, they describe that as taking place in the garden. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of perspective and how John and different ones, Matthew, remember this happening. In John's account, Jesus has a long prayer at the table after the Last Supper, and then he says here in chapter 18 that he takes his apostles and they go out from the room where they've had the meal. They go down into the Kidron Valley, which means the eastern side of Jerusalem. If you pull a map and you look at Jerusalem, and I started saying in Jesus' time, it's the same today. If you come out of the old city of Jerusalem, you'll wind around the corner because the east gate is not open. You come down into the Kidron Valley, and then you start up a pretty steep grade, and that grade on the other side is called the Mount of Olives. It was in Jesus' day. It still is today. A lot of it has been developed, and so there are businesses and houses and a cemetery on that in the Mount of Olives, but there are still lots and lots and lots of olive trees, including a place that's been kind of protected over the years, and it's known as the Garden of Gethsemane. We don't know if that's exactly where the garden was or not, but it's been preserved for a long time. And John says that they went into that garden where Jesus often met with his apostles. Very likely Jesus and his apostles slept in that garden or on the Mount of Olives sometimes during the great festivals when Jesus would go there, because so many people would come, especially at Passover, that there was no way to find a room in a place to spend the night. And so a lot of people slept out under the stars. Very likely that's what Jesus did. Some nights he went to Bethany. We hear that in some of the Gospels, but I'm guessing that at least John says they met there often. Judas knew that, and that's what he betrayed. He said to the Jewish leaders, I know where we can find him. Even though it's night, I can take you to him, and I can point out when I get to the crowd or the group, I can tell you which one, show you which one he is. So now let's read on. Here comes the betrayal. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, who is it you want? Isn't that something? You know, they've come to arrest him, and Jesus sees them coming and says, okay, Who is it? Who are you looking for? He knows. Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. John kind of leaves it to our imagination to know that Judas has led them there. Judas has brought them to the place. In another gospel, it says Judas had said, here's the sign, the one I kiss will be the one who claims to be the Messiah. He went up and kissed Jesus. He betrayed him with a kiss. John doesn't give us that detail. Listen to this, though. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Wow. Again, he asked them, who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go, referring to his apostles. He's saving them from being arrested. He's stepping out. I'm the one. He didn't want them arresting the whole group and then trying to sort out who is Jesus among them. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. So let me ask you, what strikes you about the arrest scene? Should have asked you a little earlier because of this time delay. It takes you a little while to hear my question, and then you're going to key in some comments saying, well, here's how it strikes me, and it's going to be a couple of minutes before I get those comments popped up on my screen. But I want to hear your impression. Here we've got this arrest scene. We're going to move quickly from this to Jesus being in custody and what happens there, but just for the moment, stop and think about this scene where these officials come, or people representing the officials, and now they come and they're looking, and he says, who is it that you're looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I'm he. Well, what strikes you about what happens here? There are two or three things that pop out at me, and I think John wants us to notice those. Okay, Tommy says Christ's willingness. There's no holding back, is there? He has resolved to do this thing. Mike says he leads the conversation. Yes. He doesn't shrink back at all, does he? He steps out. He leads the conversation. It strikes me, they've come armed to the teeth. They've got weapons. They got torches. And whenever he says, okay, he did not avoid the inevitable, but was trying to protect those he loved. Yeah, soldiers, lanterns, torches, but Jesus speaks and they fall back. Exactly, Nelda. That was the point that I was just about to make. They're all armed to the teeth. He speaks and they fall back. It's like, ooh, with him stepping out, there's something about him stepping out saying, I am he, that to them was scary. Oh my goodness, what's he going to do? They've heard about him raising people from the dead. They've seen the results of him healing people, and they know he has this special power. And now they fall back, and it's kind of like he goes, well, come on, you said you were looking for Jesus of Nazareth. Who is it you're looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. Well, I'm he, as I said before. I said last week that Jesus, as all of this takes place, he is the one who is in control. Yeah, they feared the results. They weren't sure. Before, people had been sent to arrest Jesus, and they came back empty-handed. And whenever the leaders said, well, where is Jesus? Why did you not bring him? It was like, you're not going to believe this guy. He just healed someone. And they said, what? Have you started believing in him too? They're almost fearing that he might be the Messiah. Yeah, could it be true? You know, these guys are soldiers and guards, and they have no real interest in seeing Jesus arrested. Their bosses do, and so they're carrying out orders, and they're kind of in a dilemma here. Could this really be the Messiah? I said last week, Jesus is going to be in control. And this begins his being in control. He steps out and the crowd falls back. He'll be the one who stays calm. When other people are anguished, it'll be Jesus who is calm and collected. Okay, I'm going to read on now from 10 to 14 as we complete this arrest scene. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. And then Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Ooh, what's the significance of Jesus saying, "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Think about that. Post a comment or two telling me about that. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest, that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. That was a case where Caiaphas was speaking truth that he didn't even understand when he said it. It's better for one man to die for the people. And so here we are. Greg says, accepting his Father's will without question. What does that remind you of? That referring to the cup as his Father's will and accepting that. What does that remind you of that John doesn't tell us about? And I'll give you a hint. It's a prayer that Jesus prays. It's interesting. John uses similar words to that in Jesus' discussion with the apostles, but he doesn't tell us about that specific prayer that Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us about. What does the cup have to do with the Father's will? What does that, I guess the way to ask it is, what does that remind us of? The Last Supper, yes. Something else. Something beyond the supper. The cup at the supper, and Jesus saying, do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. That cup also represents the Father's will that he go to the cross. Remember Jesus in his prayer saying, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus says, take this cup away from me. Don't make me drink this. He's saying, I don't want to die. But, and in the end saying, let this cup pass from me. Thank you, exactly. And then saying, but not my will, but your will be done. As Greg says, when Christ says this, he is fully accepting his Father's will. Peter, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? The other apostles had said kind of brazenly, we'll drink the cup as well. And Jesus says, really? Now, notice what happens here. They go to arrest Jesus. Peter pulls a sword and strikes at the servant, cutting off his ear. I guess it was his right ear. The other gospel writers tell us about this. In fact, Luke, who's a physician, tells us that Jesus healed the ear. He put it back on and healed the servant. But none of those other gospels written earlier tell us who did it. We shouldn't be surprised to learn in John's gospel who the one was who drew the sword. It was this kind of hot-tempered, impetuous guy, Peter. And I think the reason Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't tell us it was Peter was because he was still alive whenever they wrote their gospels. Or perhaps he had just died and his family was still alive. That may be the most likely thing. And his family might have been persecuted if people had known that it was Peter who did this. But by the time John writes his gospel, it's been years since Peter's death, and there's no harm in letting us know that it was Peter. This is just another one of those little details that we pick up in reading the different Gospels and putting the story together. Remember Peter's bravery in this action. Here he is so brave. He takes out a sword and starts the fight. You know, he's going to defend his Lord. He loves Jesus, and he's not going to let him be arrested without resisting and doing his best to defend him. And yet later this night, he will deny him, and we cluck our tongue. Oh, Peter, shame on you. Well, guess what? Peter's human. Peter loved him so much he was willing to defend him. But before the evening is over, he'll deny knowing him. Annas was the high priest, it says, had been the high priest. They take Jesus first to Annas. It says that year Caiaphas, his son-in-law, was the high priest. But this just shows that once the high priest, you always had some power. People looked to Annas as he'll know what to do. So they took Jesus to him first. He will eventually wind up at the home of Caiaphas. I looked it up. Annas was high priest from 6 to 15 AD. So it had been about 15 years since Annas was high priest, and yet he still carries a great deal of influence among the Jewish people. 15 through 18, Peter's first denial. It says, Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. You aren't one of this man's disciples, too, are you? She asked Peter. He replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Okay, John seems to know a lot about how Peter got into that courtyard. I wonder if maybe John was that other disciple. There's some details that are told there about the other disciple, maybe John, knowing the high priest so he could go in with Jesus and then realizing, okay, they've accepted me into the courtyard, now going back as an insider, going back to the gate and saying, it's okay, you can let this guy in. But doing that made the servant girl say, wait a minute, you're not one of his disciples too, are you? She may have known that John or this other disciple was one of the disciples. What do we call it when Peter says, I am not? She says, you aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? Peter replied, I am not. What do we call that? It's not the betrayal. The betrayal took place by Judas out in the garden. And I've already used this word in talking about Peter. We call this his what? His denial. Yes, thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Caleb. This is denial, denying that he is an apostle. Why do you suppose Peter denied him? My goodness, here's somebody who loved Jesus enough to whip out a sword and try to defend him physically, putting his life at risk. Now, an hour, 2 hours, sometime later, same evening, he denies being a disciple. What would make Peter do that? Yeah, fear. He's afraid. He's afraid for himself. There's a lot going on here. He can see by now that Jesus is before this guy Annas, who has been the high priest. Nothing good is going to come out of this. Peter is a human. He has human fear. And for the moment, he's going to compromise his love, his loyalty for Christ, and he's going to say, nope, not an apostle. He also, having drawn that sword, if people know that he's the one who cut off the high priest's servant's ear, he's going to be in big trouble. And so that may be in the back of his mind as well. Well, I did take up a sword to defend him. And so Jesus had predicted it exactly. In fact, he says it'll happen 3 times before dawn, before the rooster crows. But I tell you, when I look at Peter, I think about times when I've denied Christ but not speaking up when I should have, not doing something that needed to be done in the name of Christ. In some ways, those are denials as well. We're going to read every verse of this, I think, tonight. We're taking our time as we go through this. So that was through 27. Hang on here. I jumped ahead, didn't I? 19 through 24. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews came together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But I spoke the truth. Why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. You see, they're gaining nothing here. They basically are saying, tell us what you taught. And they're hoping that as Jesus says things, they can say, that's blasphemy. But he says, come on, you can ask anybody what I taught. I did it openly. I didn't teach in secret. I taught in public. And that gets him slapped. And by the way, physically slapping someone who's in a hearing before someone with the prestige of a former high priest, that was totally against decorum, against their rules. And Jesus is kind of pointing that out. Here again, he's in control. Someone lost their temper and they slap him. That would be like in our courtroom to slap or punch a person who's being tried. It just would never happen. It shouldn't have happened in their case. And Jesus kind of calls their hand on it. He is in control. He's not going to answer their questions. So then we come to Peter's second and third denials. Verse 25, meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself, so they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, you see that connection with the cutting off of the ear, challenged him, didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. Some translations would tell us the cock crow, would say the cock began to crow, the cock crow, and that was a trumpet call. The Greek for the bugle call in the morning, like reveille, that wakes soldiers up, that may have been what Jesus said before the cock crow. He may have been talking about before you hear the bugle blast from the Roman praetorium, but it may also have literally been a rooster crowing. Either one signals dawn, and the point is, Peter, before the sun comes up, you'll deny me 3 times. You can only imagine what Peter thought when he heard that, we'll say the rooster crow. And remember, that's exactly what Jesus had told him. You're going to deny me 3 times. Other Gospels give us other details. Someone heard him speaking and they picked up on that Galilean accent and said, you're a Galilean. You were with him, weren't you? John is the one who says, I was a relative of that slave whose ear Peter cut off. And that helps me to understand more about why Peter would say, no, it wasn't me. I wasn't there. He could be really, really in trouble if he's found to be the one who did that. As I said earlier when I jumped ahead, it's happened exactly like Jesus said that it would. And instead of us condemning Peter, let's just commit that we never, ever will do anything that denies him. He had to live, that's right. He had to have been feeling such terrible guilt. But remember, 3 times he denies Jesus, and later 3 times Jesus reinstates him. Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. We're going to come to that. I think that's chapter 21. And that had to be something that was so uplifting and freeing and redeeming for Peter, because you're right. He had to feel such guilt at this point. There's a movie, I can't remember if it's The Passion of Christ or which one it is, but in this scene where Peter denies him the 3rd time, he's there in the courtyard and he turns and Jesus is being taken out to Caiaphas's house, and Jesus looks straight into his eyes, knowing, you just denied me, didn't you, Peter? It's a very poignant scene. That's not literally out of the Bible, but we can imagine it. 28 to 29. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning. And to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" There's a couple other differences I want to point out. In the other Gospels, it tells us about Jesus being tried before the Sanhedrin. John doesn't tell us about that. He says they took him directly from Caiaphas' house to the soldiers, to the Pilate. And that probably says that the Sanhedrin met at Caiaphas' house. They met in a hasty gathering at night, which they are not supposed to do. They're supposed to meet during the daytime. They declared him guilty. They're never supposed to do that on the same day they try someone. The Sanhedrin was the ruling council, and they had strict rules. One was you always slept on your decision. You heard the evidence, you went home and slept. The next day you called in the accused and rendered your decision. They broke that rule. They broke a number of rules in doing that. But now they have taken Jesus to see the Roman governor. The Romans had taken away the Jews' ability to execute someone. They could not exercise capital punishment. The thing the Jews really find Jesus guilty of is blasphemy, claiming to be the Son of God. The Romans could care less about that, so they're going to accuse Jesus of something totally different before the Romans. There's another difference with the other Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that Jesus and the apostles ate the Passover meal together, and that was the Last Supper. With John's Gospel, he tells it one day different. In John's Gospel, Jesus dies on Passover. And part of that is John wants us to see that Jesus is the perfect lamb of sacrifice, the Paschal lamb. And so the way he tells it, that morning is the morning of Passover, and notice how he says the Jewish leaders who bring Jesus before Pontius Pilate, they don't go into Pilate's palace, because if they do, they become ceremonially unclean. He's a Gentile. And they would have to spend a matter of days cleansing themselves and would not be able to eat the Passover meal. They would be unclean for that evening meal. John says because of that, they waited outside. And Pontius Pilate comes to them. He breaks protocol to come to them. He's being courteous to them. And ask, "What charges are you bringing?" At verse 30 it says, "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate says, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. He said he would be crucified. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" Oh my goodness, is Jesus ever in control? It's so interesting. Pilate says, and this is what tells us in John's version what they've accused Jesus of. When Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" They've come accusing him of claiming to be a king. The Romans could care less if you claim to be God's son. They don't believe in God to start with. But to say that you're a king, that'll get you executed, because only the emperor, the Roman emperor, could be king. So now we see what they've accused him of. And Jesus is so in control, he says, did you think of that on your own, or did others tell you? And let's continue on. Pilate kind of back at Jesus says, am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? I find it interesting that this guy, Pilate, so powerful, he represents the Roman emperor in all of Palestine, and yet he doesn't know what to do. And he goes, what is it that you've done? He's asking the prisoner, tell me what you've done. And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus is acknowledging that he's king of the Jews, but he's trying to help Pilate understand it's not a kingdom you need to be afraid of. It's a different kind of kingdom. If it were of this world, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Boy, this is such an interesting conversation between Pilate. Pilate is a political animal. He wants to placate the Jews, the Jewish leaders. And yet, there's something, an antenna has gone up for him that says this man is innocent. All this stuff about being a king, it's like he's saying, this guy's done nothing wrong. And when he asks him, what have you done? And Jesus gives him this thing about everyone who comes to me, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. I've always been intrigued by Pilate's response to that. And by the way, folks, we're not going to get into 19. That's okay. We'll do chapter 19 in its entirety next week. We'll just get to the end of 18 here. What do you think Pilate meant when he says, what is truth? Jesus is saying, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Pilate heard that, and Pilate responded by saying, what is truth? And I don't know the tone of voice. Michael Smith says, what is truth indeed? I don't know if Pilate says, what is truth? Or if he says, what is truth? See the difference? He's thinking, I don't want to be a part of anything against this man. Thank you. In another gospel, Pilate's wife came to him and said, I had a dream last night. You don't want to have anything to do with punishing this man they bring to you. Pilate may be beginning to see. Pilate was a politician. He blows with the wind. He's going to try his best to save Jesus and wind up having him crucified to placate the Jewish leaders. He may have been around politics long enough that he's become cynical. And when he says, what is truth? In other words, I can't live and behave and act out truth. In fact, what is truth? There's all kinds of different versions of truth. Your truth, my truth. There's an expression going around these days that says, well, that's my truth. We have to be careful. Truth is truth. That's my background. That's my thinking. That to me is what I think truth stands for. But Nelda says Pilate can't see truth standing in front of him. Jesus is the truth, the way and the truth and the life, he said in John 14. Pilate can't see that. And I wonder if maybe instead of being cynical, Pilate is asking it in a way that says, what is truth? I'd sure like to have some truth in my life. Almost as in a seeking, searching kind of way. We don't know. We have the words on paper, what is truth, but we don't know the context in which he asked that. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? He's referred to him as the King of the Jews. That's their charge. And he's offering now to say, I can give him back to you. I find nothing wrong with him, so I can give him back. They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. That is so ironic. Barabbas had been arrested by the Romans, put in jail, being held for insurrection. He's guilty of what Jesus has been falsely accused of. Jesus is being accused of insurrection, leading a revolt, doing all kinds of things, claiming to be a king, and yet they asked for Barabbas, who had done those things. We'll end there. Pilate is doing his best to let Jesus go free, not because necessarily that Pilate was a good or an honorable person, but he can see that the charges are not valid. And so he's trying to do the just thing in this case and give Jesus back. Well, if you would read chapter 19 for next week, and just read chapter 19. Won't try to get into 20, but we'll do chapter 19 and we'll take it from there. Hope you all have enjoyed the study tonight. I certainly have, and hope you didn't mind too bad being in my workshop. It sure is nice and cool and pleasant in here. And I look forward to seeing some of you on Sunday, and the rest of you maybe next Wednesday in our Bible study. Take care and God bless.